So today I'm going to talk about this little axe, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins of the Hudson Bay pattern as I understand it. So I made this handle and the sheath. And the sheath is only my second time actually trying to do stitching instead of just rivets. And it's my first time trying to do an enclosed sheath. I think the sheath came out overall, I'm happy with it. The stitching, it looks like it's my second time. The nicest thing you could say about it is that it looks better than the first time. So I bought this axe at a flea market. And it just, for $20 Canadian, it just really spoke to me. Part of what I liked about it was the handle it came on. And this is a really nice, it's a really nice old ash handle, great patina. But when I went to rehang it, I found out that really it's mostly, most of the wood is gone from inside the eye, and it's mostly just metal that's been jammed in there afterwards, and there's it's starting to crack and it's warped. So I decided the best thing to do was replace it. And so I took a piece of the ash. I've been working on this white ash I've been making all sorts of things out of. So I guess this is part 10 in my series on making things out of that ash tree. This is an offcut from the paddle I made. And I tried to replicate that original handle. And it's got curly grain. That section of the tree had curly grain. So I'm happy with how that turned out. And so I, this axe didn't have any stamps on it or anything. I didn't know anything about it when I bought it, but as it happens, I came across what I'm pretty sure is this axe in an old catalog when I was trying to look up something else. So I came across an axe in the Rice, Lewis and Son hardware catalog from 1898 from Toronto. And I think this is in there. It's called the Hunter's Tomahawk. And I suspect it was made by Welland Vale just because the other axes in that catalog, most of them seem to be made by Welland Vale. And Welland Vale used this type of handle for some of their other hunter's axes. So that's what I think. But either way, cool little Hudson Bay pattern axe. And old. I don't know if this axe is actually that old, but I haven't seen any examples from later catalogs, so it may well be almost 130 years old, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so because of that, I did want to say a few things about the origin of the Hudson Bay pattern, and I'll put links to sources so you can see where I'm getting some of this information in the video description. But there seems like there's this idea floating around based on conversations I've had online and articles I've read that the Hudson Bay pattern originated in the middle of the 20th century as a nostalgic throwback to the fur trade era and the tomahawks and trade axes from that time. And that it's meant to represent those aesthetically, but it's, from a later era. And that's not really true. The reason it's called the Hudson Bay pattern is because it was sold by the Hudson Bay Company towards the end of the fur trade era. So it's not much later than trade axes. It in fact overlapped with trade axes, that there was axes like this were being made by the same smiths at the same forges that were making trade axes in the latter part of the 1800s. So the precursors to the Hudson Bay pattern that were already specific to the Hudson Bay Company appeared in they were the 1840s, and they were similar to this, except they had a very wide eye, so they were probably meant to be hung slip fit. But by the 1860s, the Hudson Bay pattern that was sold by the Hudson Bay Company looked essentially like this. And it had the short eye, so it had, but a well-developed pole, so it has this kind of short rectangular pole and mostly flat on top, possibly a slight upsweep on some of them like this, and a low heel to give it, you could choke up onto it. It could be a light axe with a fairly wide bit, and it had a pole that you could drive some stakes with if need be. So that was, and I'll put some pictures up of some old ones, some archaeological specimens of Hudson Bay axes that look like this. And so, yeah, those were apparently in place by 1860, and then they've probably been made continuously since then. So, you know, in the around 1900, 1890s, 1900, you can see in like the Hudson Bay catalog, they listed them as Hudson Bay axes, and they made some of them upwards of 4 pounds, which is pretty cool. You don't see those big ones, at least not very often. But Welland Vale was making them. They called them the Hudson Bay pattern. So you know, in the 1890s. So it's not a newer pattern. It's not 1960s. It's 1860s is when this pattern originated, and it was traded from trading posts. And yeah, they had the ellipsi that is meant to be probably meant for a wedge fit hang, although some of them were hung slip fit. I'll put a picture up I found from the Beaver, which is the Hudson Bay Company magazine, from 1946, but the picture's from 1913, and it shows a woman using a slip fit hung Hudson Bay pattern axe. At least it looks slip fit to me. And so yeah, that's pretty neat. And I'll put some, yeah, as I said, some other pictures up. And it's been a popular pattern ever since. So it's possible, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that they've never been out of production since the 1860s. So for the last 170 years or so, almost, they've probably, somebody somewhere has been making a Hudson Bay axe. So Hudson Bay companies made them and had them made for them on contract. And then, you know, before 1900, Welland Vale was making and selling them. Later on, Walters and Collins and Snow and Neely, and then eventually Norland, Council Tool, Wetterlings, Kelly had a version. So yeah, Grants Force, you know, lots of companies, that's not even close to all of them, have made a version of the Hudson Bay pattern that follows that basic design. And so, you know, and then there's variants like the tall eye Hudson Bay and stuff, because, you know, sometimes there can be trouble getting them to hang. I mean, there's some extreme versions like Norland's an example, where they have a really wide, like low heel and a really short pole. And so those ones especially have trouble. A quick interjection here. I was talking about the Tomahawk model that Norland had, but they also had the camper axe, and that is basically a tall-eyed Hudson Bay. Despite any critiques you might have, it's a classic design that's been popular for a really long time, and not just like an aesthetic novelty. It is in fact a fur trade axe design. So that's my thoughts on the origin of the Hudson Bay pattern, and this is my little Hudson Bay Hunter's Tomahawk, and I'm pretty happy with it, and I hope you guys found the video interesting, and I'll catch you next time.